Buongiorno, buona festa della liberazione. Good morning and happy Feast of the Liberation. Today it's a very important date in Italy. It's a national holiday. It's the date in which Italy remembers the liberation from fascism and Nazism. It's a very symbolical date. It's always also at the center of some controversy. The last one is that one of the prefects prohibited the singing of Bella Ciao, that is the anthem of the Partigiani, in the official celebrations. I'm very tempted to ask you to sing it all with me. So when we decided to have this seminar on this day, it was not random. Very few of the things we do are random, and these much less than others. Of course, we're not talking about the resistance today. Today we're not talking about the anti-fascist and anti-Nazi struggle in Italy. We're talking about something completely different. But we're talking about minorities. We're talking about minorities that were heavily oppressed and exterminated during fascism. So just wanted to remind you of this, especially those of you who are not Italian and are not necessarily observing April 25th. So instead of having a holiday Italian style, we decided to have a seminar in which we think about a very specific topic. As you know, today is dedicated to the Jews of Libya, and we have two wonderful speakers, one from Italy and one from England, that will keep us occupied most of the day. And without further ado, we'd like to ask Natalia Endrimi, who's the director of the Centro Primo Levi and organizer of these series of seminars that we host here at the Casa, to come and greet you. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefano. Thank you, all of you, for coming. I'd like to add, we just published on our online monthly a beautiful piece by Cesare Segre, who passed away a few months ago, about April 25th. And I invite all of you to go on our website and read it. I'd like to thank Stefano Albertini, Ruth Benguiat, the Casa Italiana, for this partnership that has brought us, I think, to our fourth seminar in Italian Jewish Studies. This is one of the Italian departments of Italian Studies that has a teaching of history, which is seems strange, but it's rare in the United States. And we have started to develop this this chapter, hoping that will expand to perhaps visiting professorship or other forms of cultivation of the teaching and learning of the history of Italian Jews. Today we have two very special guests, and we have expanded our exploration to the Jewish communities linked to Italy that have been that have links that developed between the 18th and the 20th century in the Mediterranean countries. This is the first one, and we'll have a series of other seminars on the same topic that will go all around the Mediterranean basin to find these ties, these Jewish ties between Italy and again the countries of the North Africa and the Middle East and the former Ottoman Empire. I'll stop here, and I'll ask Ruth Benguiat to introduce our speakers in the seminar. And again, after the two presentations, we'll open the floor for a discussion. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you so much, and I'm pleased to always so pleased to have this seminar, to be co-hosting this seminar, and today's topic is especially dear to me because it also symbolizes that the newer directions our department has gone in the last years into Mediterranean studies, into colonial and post-colonial studies, as well as keeping a very fine tradition of teaching Italian literature and culture from medieval to today. So this is a special topic, and I was very, very pleased to be able to host this today. So I'll give some introduction of the speakers. Barbara Spadaro will speak second, and she holds a PhD in modern contemporary history from l'Istituto Italiano di Scienze Umane, and she's a postdoctoral fellow at the University of Bristol. And her research on memory and material culture of the Italians in the Mediterranean, as well as colonialism, citizenship in Europe, has given fruit to a book that came out just in 2013, Una colonia italiana, incontri, memoria e rappresentazione fra Italia e Libya. So very appropriate relations between Italy and Libya, also in memory and representation. Her interest in the Jews in Libya stems from her research on the urban bourgeoisie of Tripoli and Benghazi during colonialism. Her most recent research examines from a post-colonial perspective the memory of Jews of Libya, and she has a project that is being funded in part by the Rothschild Foundation in Europe, Mapping Living Memories, the Jewish Diaspora from Libya across Europe and the Mediterranean, which I imagine is the basis of her talk for today. So our first speaker, David Meghnagi, was born in Tripoli and moved to Italy with his family after the pogrom of 1967, the third one in 22 years there. He's a professor of clinical psychology at the University of Rome, Tre, where he also teaches group psychology, psychology of religion, and Jewish culture. He's a member of the International Psychoanalytic Association and editor-in-chief of Trauma and Memory, the European Review of Psychoanalysis and Social Science. His studies on Jewish elements in Freud work are considered classic. They've given rise to many acclaimed books. He received the Fuji Prize for the application of psychoanalysis to historiographical research in the book Israel's Challenges, which was published in 2010 by Marsilio, and is really so valuable. I've read it for its methodological insights, which are so clearly stated. And he has many, many books. The most recent ones, Ricomporre l'infranto, l'esperienza dei sopravvissuti alla Shoah, the experience of the survivors of the Shoah, Le sfide di Israele, the challenges of Israel, and Tra Vienna e Gerusalemme, between Vienna and Jerusalem. He is finally an expert of Jewish liturgical music and began a preservation project. And the first result of this is the CD Shiru Shir, the cantorial tradition of the Libyan Jews. And I believe he's going to start his presentation with an example. So let's get to that. Exciting. Thank you.
Good morning. Okay. Thank you. It's very nice to see with you today, to meet you, to stay together and to discuss. And I thought that it was very important to introduce my my speech with this music. I use every Friday when I finish my work to go and to prepare new music about our history and to print them. So this is the first. But I have a collection about I like to sing, I like to sing also. For me it is a life. When in the morning, before to say Matovu Alech Yaakov, my mind is connected with this music every day, so I need to do it. For me it is important. And I discovered a very interesting thing. A group of American psychiatrists wrote a paper about a psychoanalyst in Italy who used music for therapy and not medicine. And so they are discussing about this this project of music. I think it is very useful also for therapy. Sometimes when I work with the old people coming from North Africa, but also from other area, I use music. If they are, the background is a religious background, I use the music, and I became also expert of Christian music in this moment because I used also that. I think that it is very important because it is a very universal language. So it is very interesting. My speech today is about Mordechai Cohen. Mordechai Cohen was a very interesting scholar. He was a rabbi between the two centuries. He died in 29. He was born in 86 of the last century. The family, the origin of the family is from Genova. So it is very interesting because it is a connection between Jews from Libya and Jews from Italy. The father left Genova, but he was captured by the Arab spirit. and they make him slave, and he was liberated in Libya by the Jewish community and by the family from Italy, and he decided to come back in Genova, but the sea was not helpful with him, and so he rested in Libya. In that time, the Mediterranean cooperation was blocked by many wars, many difficult situations, and just the relationship between Leghorn and the Tripoli was really operated, and it was necessary for someone who is able to speak Arabic and to speak Italian. And so the grandfather of this rabbi learned Arabic freely, very fastly, and he began to work in Libya. Why? Because he was very able to speak in Hebrew, so from Hebrew he was able to learn Arabic and collected 3 languages and began to work in Libya, and also developed a competition. What's happened? He married in Libya with the daughter of the rabbi, and so began to be HaCohen in Tripoli. The son also worked between Tripoli and different area in Greece, in Creta, in other area, and he died very young in Creta, and so all his money, all his faculties, possibility was lost. Just the consulate was able to give to the family 800 francs from his money, and the family didn't want to receive help from the Italian embassy. Not the Italian embassy in that time, was the consulate in Tripoli, because they were very proud. And this is an aspect of the Jewish community in Tripoli. They are very proud. They don't accept to be helped by someone. I remember that when we arrived in '67 in Rome as refugees, the American joint helped our family for 1 month, and they paid the hotel. But when we left the hotel, after 3 months, I remember that my brother wanted to give back the money that he received. And they didn't understand what that means. That he said, perhaps someone who is coming after me needs that. I don't know how it happened, all the aspects, but I remember this aspect. I think it is an aspect of our community, of the middle class of our community, not to receive help. And this is the reason, because in our community, when we give tzedakah, the tzedakah has to be completely sacred. No one has to know who is the man that received help, because you protect his son, you protect the dignity of the family and the future of the family. So it is very important. I think it's a very important step. And this is also explain some aspect of the history of HaCohen, Mordechai Cohen. Mordechai Cohen was connected with a family of Sanguinetti. Why Sanguinetti? I didn't know that Sanguinetti is a Jewish origin. Yes, because it's Cohen origin. Sanguinetto, sangue puro. So means that you are from Cohen origin. Cohen origin. And he stayed in Libya. The father of Mordechai died in Creta. The mother of Mordechai began to work, and also the son. He was child, 6 years old. He began to work. He began to teach and to help the rabbi in the synagogue and the school, to teach the students, because he was very clever. He was able, in that time, at 6 years, at 7 years old, he was able to teach other children. At 8, at 11, at 12. So he began to work inside the Jewish school to help, but it was not enough for him. So he began also to be a peddler. Many poor Jews in Libya were peddlers. They connected the center of Tripoli, the coast of Tripoli, with the desert, with the Jebel Nefusa. And so he began to work as a peddler to bring something from the center and to bring oil, food from eggs from the desert, from the village, and to bring them in Tripoli. And he began very, very fastly to register, to study the customs, the ability, the activity, the history as an ethnographer. Very, very, he began very soon. And he was connected with a scholar, a Jewish Russian scholar, Schluss. He was a very romantic scholar, background Jewish from Russia, speaking fluently Hebrew, and he entered in contact with Mordechai Cohen, and they together began to visit the Jewish community of the Jebel Nefusa and to write many, many elements that Mordechai Cohen collected. He gave them, and Professor Schluss used all these aspects in his many, many important books that he wrote about the history and the culture of the Jewish of North Africa. The collection of Mordechai Cohen, it is very interesting, very important, because it's the unique elements that we have today to enter directly with the condition, the real condition, and the representation of that condition in that time, written by someone that was living there. And Mordechai Cohen, because he was connected with the activity of the rabbi, of the chief rabbi in Tripoli, he was able in free time, in the afternoon, to study all the documents of the Jewish archive in Tripoli. We lost many part of that archive. It was very important archives of our community from a long time. And the rabbi in Libya used it also to write history, to write about history, to register many things, and to put them inside the archives of the community. He used that archives, and all the time he said, I brought this aspect from Rabbi Halfon, that aspect from Rabbi Haddadi, that aspect from other rabbis. So it is very interesting because we can, from this book that he wrote, but he was not able to publish the book. The book is in Israel, was published in just in 78 for a long time. Just a little group of people knew about that. But for the majority, also when I was child, for me it was difficult to know many things that I can tell today to you. Just I remember when I was child, just a part of this big collection, it was able to read it, just a part, published it in 24th or 28th by Martino, but it is not all the book, just a part dedicated to the Jewish of Tripoli. It is very interesting, and I republished it. I reprinted this book in 94 with Juntina. But it is just a little part of the book. But the part dedicated to the desert, to the Jebel Nefusa, we waited many times to be able to read it. Okay, Professor Schluss used many things. There are many romantic aspects in this presentation of Rabbi Mordechai Cohen. he thought that the Berbers of the desert were Jewish, from Jewish origin, and they were converted by the Arabs. It is not true. It is a very romantic theory. Why he arrived to this theory? Because many aspects of the life are very primitive aspects, and with many analogy with aspects of Devarim, of the life of the Jews about 2,000 years ago. So he saw that perhaps many aspects present in that life could be explicated by an origin of this population. Because we know that in the time of Rome, the Cyrene area was populated by Jews. Many Jews were present. They were very active in the war for freedom against Rome. And about 200,000 people were killed in that time by the Roman Empire. And they were very active. We cannot forget that Alexandria of Egypt was a very important center and was very near to the east of Libya. Giuseppe Flavio was a great philosopher. We lost him for a long time. Just the Christian church used him. But he was religious. He was a Pharisaic man connected with the Pharisaic movement, but in the same time he was very involved in Greek philosophy. But after the destruction of the temple, many of these aspects of the Jewish life were lost by the Jewish tradition. We wait a long time, like the Scriptiaginta, the translation of the Bible in Greek. The translation was a Jewish translation. It was a great holiday in Alexandria of Egypt for the Septuaginta. But the Christian church used the Septuaginta for a long time. We lost it. And after a long time, we began to bring at home many aspects of our history, because it was part of our history. And Mordechai Cohen, because it studied for a long time, he wrote a book about Jewish history, but this book was not published. We could read it in Hebrew in the Hebrew University, in the library of the Hebrew University. He was involved in Jewish history. He was connected also with the newspaper and the publication in Europe, in Warsaw also. So he was very connected with the old history, and began to think that perhaps all this population, the Berbers, because he made difference between the Berbers and the Arabs. The Arabs are the dominator, the Berbers dominated by the Arabs after the Arabs invasions. And he thought perhaps this population is the origin of this population is a Jewish origin. It is not true. This is a romantic theory about, like the Kuzari is another romantic theory that we know about the Jews from Ashkenaz. Perhaps they are from a kingdom of Jews in the Middle Age. It is not true. It is a romantic history. We know from many things. The Jewish tradition is a very conservative tradition. If something remained like in the Marranos, you can find some elements that could help you, that can help you. But this is not important for us to see what it is true in the book of Mordechai Cohen, what it is not true. What it is important is the description of the Jewish life, every element, every community, and the capacity of him to be in contact also with the Arab culture, the strategy of the strategies that he used. I found a very, 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 very nice picture of this strategy. Sometimes it was normal for us. I remember in my life also it happened when I was a child. Someone began to speak against the Jewish tradition, against the Jewish religion, and to ask Jew why he remained a Jew, why he doesn't convert himself to Islam, or to cry against Jew. And the strategy of Mordechai Cohen, because Mordechai Cohen was very involved also in reading Quran. He knew very well the Quran, because he was able also to read directly in Arabic, not just to use the Jewish alphabet, also to use the Arabic alphabet. And an Arab began to cry, or a Berber, I think, cry against him. How a Jew, why you don't convert yourself? And Mordechai Cohen answered him, I don't speak with people not cultivated and not kind, that doesn't know anything. And the Arab began to cry hard against him. How you can speak against me? And to say, you are a Jew, to say to me that I am not a cultivated man. And he answered him, yes, because if you know the Quran, in the Quran is written that if you speak with the people of the book about religion, you have to be kind. And you are not kind, so I understand that you are a very ignorant man. So it is very interesting to the strategy. So because it is a very difficult situation, you cannot say anything against someone, against the religion of the other. If you say something against the Quran or against Arab tradition, they are able to kill you and to kill also the population. It's a very hard line. But in this hard line, he was able not to give anything about dignity. Dignity is important. So the elaboration of the strategy is very interesting. In another situation, with the Pasha, when the Pasha, the Ottoman Pasha, decided to change the life of Tripoli and to introduce reform in Tripoli, and they decided that if someone died and there are not descendant, all the money have to go to the Pasha, to the municipality, to the state, or the estate to the state. And the Arabs were not agree, and also the Jews, because it was a robbing activity by the authority against the family. And so it was very interesting, because they decide to go to the Pasha and to ask him to stop. What had happened? A Jew, the name of this Jew was Atiyah, very important family. He died without descendant. And the Pasha said, in the Quran is written that we have to protect orphans. And all the money, if someone is orphan, has to be protected by the state. And came Rav Mordechai Cohen, and he said to the Pasha, but in the Quran it is written that the orphans have to be protected. But Mr. Atiyah was not orphan, he was an old man. And the Pasha was stopped. He said, okay, I need 2 weeks to reflect about that. And he wrote to Constantinople, and from Istanbul, the chief rabbi helped, because there were another side of activity. The chief rabbi in Constantinople was in contact with the chief rabbi in Tripoli. And but he helped. And after, from Constantinople, they told him it's better to stop with this. So many pictures that could help us to understand two things. First, the condition. The condition, it was a very hard condition. Under the Arabs, the condition was very bad. Under the Ottoman, the condition was better, began to be better, because the Ottoman, also because the European state in that time began to ask the Ottoman Empire to change the law, to introduce reform, to protect the Christians and to protect the Jews with the new laws of freedom for all the population. So many things. Introduction that law were introduced with the activity of the European powers, French and Great Britain. So it was also a way for them to introduce themselves in the Arabs, in the Arabic countries and the Ottoman Empire, to change and also to occupy after a long time. So it was a war, but in the same time, that repressed were very important to change the life of the minorities from their condition of dhimma. The condition of dhimma is the condition of subalternity, of condition of humiliation, in which you could become also a rich man, an important man, but just single important man, but in the same time you are oppressed because you are a Jew, you are a Christian. So the condition of the community, it's a hard condition, and in time of crisis, without protection of the center, became very, very dangerous to be a Jew in that time, very dangerous. And if you see the history of the Jews of North Africa, in all the time of crisis, when they collapsed, where the center collapsed, the condition of the minority began to be very dangerous. In particular, in the periphery, in the area where the center was not present. So it is very interesting part of the history of the Jews and the Arabic and the Muslim country that it is not known clearly. And but this change began with the Ottoman when they came back to Tripoli in the middle of the 19th century. This change began to create inside the Muslim society a hard reaction against the Jews, because in that area of Libya, but also in all the Maghreb, the unique religious minority really were the Jews, not the Christians. The Christians were European in that area. Just in the Middle East, it's very different situation where the minorities were Jews, Christian, and Zoroastrians. But in the Maghreb, in the West area, Christianity, in very fastly was destroyed as community, or converted, or expelled. In the Middle East, for a long time, we have a presence of Christianity until the last century. If you see in Turkey, 20% of the population were Christians. After they killed them, you know the history, tragic history of the Armenian. But for a long time, also in Iraq, a long part, a very important part of the population was Christian. Also in Syria, Today, no. In Iraq, just the 3%, not more. So the situation began to change also in the Middle East. But in the time of the Crusade, the presence of Christianity in the Middle East was very prominent, was very important, was very part. They were dhimmi, protected population, oppressed in the same time, tolerated in the same time, but a very large part of the population occupied in also in a large part of Egypt until today. You can see 8 million of Egyptians are from the Coptic religion. So the condition of the Jews as unique element, unique minority, a religious minority in Libya, created a new situation after this introduction of reform. But the reaction of the Muslim population, the local Muslim population, was a reaction of hate against this change of condition. So the Weltanschauung, we can see saying in German word, the vision of the world in the Muslim traditional perspective, didn't accept the idea that a Jew could become like a Muslim. And when the Ottoman began to decided to introduce condition for Jews to be soldier, they decided to begin with the Jew because the Muslim didn't want to be as soldiers in the army of the Ottoman in Libya. And the Jewish community answered to the Ottoman, it is not possible that a Jew could be a soldier before a Muslim. If you do that, they began to hate us. And the Ottoman accepted that. So they decided that it was necessary more time to do that and to have an army. And they prepared a more situation in which it was possible to have Arab soldiers, Jewish soldiers inside the Ottoman army. And Mordechai Cohen was active in that protest when he explained the danger if a Jew became a soldier before a Muslim, an Arab Muslim in Libya, because for the Arabs and for the Berbers, the Jews were a dhimmi. A dhimmi, it's a particular condition. This is a tragedy for the Arabic world, I think. It is a tragedy for them, I think, because they were not able to change from inside the perspective of freedom and to accept the Jewish minority as a part of the nation. So after what it developed the Arabic nationalism, also the Arabic nationalism didn't accept the Jews as a part of the nation. If you see the history also in the Middle East, you can see the Pan-Arabic movement was a movement created by Christian Arabs because they sublimated their condition. They thought in an Arab nation we could be part of the nation. But in this Arab nation, the Jews were out. And if you see the history of the Jews in the Middle East before the birth of Israel state, you can see Jews involved in socialist organization, in liberal organization, in communist organization, but not in Pan-Arabic organization. It's clear why. Because Pan-Arabism, when have been developed as a movement, as a national movement, was clearly against the Jews. And the connection with the fascist movement, with the Nazi movement, was part of that perspective. So we come back to the situation of the Mordechai Cohen. The change introduced by the Ottoman created a situation, but I don't think that this change created the situation. I think that the not capacity of the Arabic Weltanschauung, religious Weltanschauung, to accept the transformation. I think we have some analogy with something that happened also in Europe, with the reaction in the Slavist movement against the Jews in Russia and in the anti-Semitism in Germany. There are some analogy. The introduction of reform by Napoleon Bonaparte, you have a development of nationalism in Germany by Fichte against the Jews. So it is not the same. It is not the same, but we have some analogy to understand why a long production of hate against the Jews have been developed between this period until the other period. And this can explain the pogrom of 45, 48, and 67 that happened 100 years after. I don't think that the connection is with the creation of Israel. No, I think that it is the collapse, the incapacity of the Arabic ideology and the Islamic ideology to accept transformation of the condition of the Jews from the condition of dhimmi. Why I say that? Because after the Ottoman came the Italians, and the Italians introduced a new situation. It was a colonial power against the Arabs. And it is a big difference because the Ottomans were Muslims, so also the change of the condition of the minorities were under a Muslim rule, but the transformation under the Italian power were transformation under a Christian European rule. I say Christian not because the Italians are Christians, but because the representation of the Muslim liberation movement, nationalistic liberation movement, was a representation of Crusade war. So the change came after the Italians. The change was particularly hard for them to accept it because it was a change in which the condition of the Arabs was a condition, an humiliated condition. They began to develop their activity against the rule of the Italians. They were oppressed, but at the same time the Italians introduced many new reform in the life, the development of economy also. 10% of the Italian budget was used for the colony. So it was a project, a big project of the Italian colonialism to use this occupation as a part of a bigger project to create a new Italian empire. They say la quarta sponda. So that means something, that for the Italian colonialism, occupation of Africa was something that means the recreation of the Roman Empire. So the reaction of the population, for a long time, we have had the First World War, the Second World War, with the transformation of also of the Jewish condition, the racial war, the racist law against the Jew was applied also in Libya in a different way, but it was applied. Jews in Libya were deported during the war in Jado, we have had a camp where many people died. 1/4 of the Jewish community of Benghazi died there. More than 600 people died there in 41 before the deportation from Europe, from Italy in 43. It was part of the political activity of the Italian army, because the Jewish community of Benghazi was in the border, and they thought that perhaps they could be pro-British, and so they began to deport them in the desert of Jado. And in Jado, the majority of the deported people began to die. 1/4 of the population died. More than 600 people. And also in the politic perspective of the Italian rule in front of the Jews changed and became more pro-Arabs. And so the hate of the Arabs were legitimated in the old period of the Italian rule in Libya. Other element. In 43, we have the liberation in Libya after the war of El Alamein. In El Alamein, the situation of the Jews in all North Africa and in the Middle East changed. Without El Alamein, without the victory of El Alamein, all the Jews of North Africa, all the Jews of Israel, was not Israel in that time as a state, but I say the Yishuv. The project was to kill them with the help of the Palestinian nationalistic movement. Al-Husseini was in Berlin, from Berlin, every day speech in Arabic. Another base of speech in Arabic was the city of Bari. And for all the time of the war, the Arabs population listened in Italian, in Arabic from Italy, in Arabic from Berlin, speech against the Jews, legitimation to kill the Jews, and in some time a presentation of Hitler like a new Mahdi. Mahdi is the Messiah in the Arabic tradition. So not a comparison between Hitler and Muhammad, because it was not possible to say Hitler is like Muhammad, but to say Hitler is a Mahdi, yes. And this could explain many aspects of the ideology today of Hamas and other Arabic fundamentalistic movement. It is not part of the tragedy of the conflict in the Middle East between Israel and the other states. No, it is a part of a long history that we have to explain better today and to understand. And so this book of Mordechai Cohen could help us, because we can see the situation in the transformation. And the pogrom of 45, it happened under the British rule for 3 days. And so it is very difficult to explain that, why and how the British rule was not so present to block the situation just after 3 days. First question, but I don't want to enter in this question because we need a long time for that, and I have to give space for the other relation. The second question, how a nationalistic movement could do that, I say the Arab movement, because this activity against the Jews, it was like something negative for the image of the new country, in a moment, very important moment, in which in the United Nations were discussed the future of the country, how and in a very rationalistic, I say rationalistic, but what does it mean, I don't know, but in a very perspective of politics, it is not a good politic for a nationalistic movement to do that. Why? You cannot explain with the nationalistic project. You can explain it, you can explain if you put in your mind what I said before. For the Arabs movement to kill the Jews in 45 means we are free. We can say no to the British, we can say we are independent, we can say we can do against the Jews what it is necessary to do against a dhimmi who say I don't want to be a dhimmi. It is very hard to explain that today in the political discussion, but I think, in my close, in a cultural perspective, it is very important to see differently the problem and to open a way also for politics. For analogy, the books of Mose, a great historian from Germany, he gave many important elements to understand the cultural change in Germany in 18th century in a cultural perspective, and that cultural perspective could help us to understand better the political development. So, what I am presenting today, it is a cultural perspective. It is not a political solution or a political perspective. But I think it is important for politics to have a cultural perspective to understand better the problems. Thank you.
Second presentation, and then we open the floor to discussion. Barbara. Barbara Spadaro, the University of Bristol. Meghnagi has introduced her before, and she will now.
Thank you. I'm so sorry about to be late today, but I was so excited about this meeting that I got lost in the big city. So I hope that you will forgive me. So thank you very much for this invitation. And the title that I have chose for this intervention of today is Mapping Living Memories, from Mapping Living Memories to Investigating Postcolonial Histories, Narratives of the Jews from Libya in Historical Perspective. And I have chosen this title because this sounds a bit like a trajectory between the project that I have been carried out last year for the CEDEC Foundation of Milan, the interdisciplinary project Mapping Living Memories, the Jewish diaspora from Libya across Europe and the Mediterranean, and the more individual patterns of investigation that I have been pursuing since starting studying the Jews of Libya. So today I will trace an itinerary in order to organize the different threads of questions and the debates that I am intersecting in my research. But I will start from my background, and then I will move towards an outline of the project that I will present a bit later. So my background is in Italian and European history, and my work is concerned with the historical transformation of ideas of subjectivity, citizenship, and Europe during the 19th and the 20th centuries. My research aims at developing postcolonial way of reading and writing the history of Italy, Europe, and the Mediterranean. That means, in my perspective, building on the work of scholars such as Sandra Ponzanesi and Luisa Pastellini, in order to develop more inclusive and nuanced account of Italian and European identity. So during this talk, I will return on how my work aims at expanding the paradigm of Italian postcolonialism. But to begin, I just want to stress that my study of the histories and narratives of the Jews from Libya specifically address the multiple meanings of Italianness that, in my view, these narratives encapsulate. So I'm concerned mostly with those Tripolini, as they are called in Rome, the Jews from Libya, grown up in the Italian community in independent Libya, whose families flee the country in the late 60s, choosing Italy as a destination. I am focusing on these historical actors as subjects whose significance in the construction of ideas of Italian cultures and identities, including ideas of Jewish identity in Italy, has been long overlooked by Eurocentric, unidirectional reading of these concepts. The interview fieldwork carried out with the Mapping Living Memories project has been a great exercise for reading those mainstream narratives against the grain. I have taken this project as an opportunity to question given ideas of fixed and given communities, and of coherent and fixed subjectivities altogether. This means broadening my historical work on how individual and collective narratives of the past are imbued in the present, keep shaping perception of the identities, ideas, and of the future. So the study of how individual and collective narratives intertwine in the making of imagined communities is hardly new in the field of European history. Historians, in fact, have promptly acknowledged the importance of Maurice Holbrook's analysis of the socio-historical quality of memory, and this has fostered different streams of critical reflections, notably in oral history, on how the practice of history transforms ideas of identity and community. In recent years, scholarship burgeoning from different specialisms and now clustering under the label of memory studies has been analyzing the presentness of memory in our globalized, increasingly digitalized world, highlighting how various manifestations of memory's activity in the present keep perpetual tensions in meanings of the past and communities of identity. In this world, memory as social practice has intensified, acquiring high political voltage. As some scholars have pointed out, activation of communities of memory eventually foster mainstream perception of a polarized relation between history and memory, typically when claiming from traumatic memory against history. Such polarization indeed reflects important changes in the meaning and functions of history in our societies, which is a huge theme that I will leave on the backdrop of this talk. But to keep it short, I just would say that the emergence of multiple memories certainly undermine coherence and stability of mainstream narratives, typically national narratives, as La memoria divisa, theorized by Giovanni Contini, or the Italy's divided memory explored by historian John Foote have illustrated. Then goals and effects of counter-memories are also unstable and variegated. They also change over time. This happens since the calling for acknowledgement and inclusion in the wider history drives the articulation of new ethics of the present, towards different forms of sharing of memories, and eventually towards ideas of moral communities envisaging new, post-national, dynamic forms of belonging. Cases in point are recent articulation of memories of slavery and the Holocaust, two important narratives of our time that are both entering an era of post-memory. While the subjects that have actually experienced those events as victims, perpetrators, or bystanders are disappearing, their legacy still bounds generations of children, activists, and members of the societies that acknowledge their memories. Facing such challenges, recent readings of Memory of the Holocaust as a cosmopolitan, multidirectional memory calls for a shift from a paradigm of uniqueness and exceptionalism, once associated with nationalist projects and ideas of the European specificity of the Holocaust, can be broadened, acquiring a global language of human rights, into which, to put it in the words of Susan Ralston and Bill Schwartz, the remembrance of victims, perpetrators, bystanders, and activists will be inscribed against all forms of slavery, colonialism, genocide, and subordination. So this long premise has been aimed at framing one important issue that I'm facing in my research, namely the role that articulation of the memories of the Jews from Libya as part of a wider spectrum of memories of the Jews from former European colonies are about to play in our global and alleged asemitic Europe. Asemitism is a thought-provoking neologism forged by Diana Pinto, and I have. So, asemitism is a thought-provoking neologism formed by Diana Pinto to describe some crucial challenges in terms of pluralism and globalization faced by the Jews in Europe and the West. Pinto argues that European societies are becoming what she calls asemitic. In other words, societies no longer prey to either anti-Semitic or philo-Semitic sentiments. The preoccupation of Europe in this era of globalization are shifting, and Jewish life is no longer considered as a Holocaust-related responsibility, but simply as one piece of an even more pluralistic kaleidoscope. So she wrote, in our era of globalization, even within Europe, where Jews had always been the significant other, they are no longer the only diasporic people. They are no longer the only central minority. They are not the only ones carrying historical charged wounds. Vis-à-vis a plethora of people from very diverse origins, ethnic group, religion, anthropological cultures, and languages, Europe's Jews have become part of the continent's old majorities, to borrow a term I have used in an American context. White, Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, without Christ. Given the strong historical rootedness, Christian or bourgeois elite may still think of the Jews as culturally different, but these are no longer, as in the past, politically relevant. For the other that elicits worry or hostility is no longer the Jews, but the Muslims. So Diana Pinto detects, in my perspective, from an explicit Eurocentric position, the shifts occurring into the mainstream narratives of pluralism and democracy that have laid the basis of European and Western identities over the last 6 decades. Now that a growing number of other minorities, often of immigrant origins and backgrounds, are bearing into Europe histories different from the Holocaust, she exhorts Jews at contributing to the reformulation of open, pluralist, and democratic spaces where Jewish and non-Jewish identity will be negotiated. This implies rethinking Jewish identity, widening their spectrum, and in fact, her article begins with a colorful series of variegate, postmodern and eclectic sketches of Jewish types in early 21st century Europe. In doing so, Pinto stresses how these characters reflect a creativity and lightness of being hardly imaginable as a decade ago, when the Holocaust and Israel still defined the underpinnings of a European Jewish identity. Unfortunately, though, Pinto's colorful picture does not include the Tripolini of Rome, nor another postmodern figure of the Jew in the West, that of the Arab Jews. But this leaves me the opportunity of pointing you out a couple of issues. So first, I would like to stress the fact that negotiation of Jewish and non-Jewish identities in Europe, especially since the 1960s, has occurred with the participation of Jews repatriated from the former colonies of Europe. Their contribution to the recovery of Jewish life in Europe has been substantial, although not fully explored yet. Their exact numbers are a matter of contention, but as an orientation for what I will say now that in 1962, 120,000 out of a total of 1 million pieds noirs repatriated from Algeria in France were Jews. In 1967, on the other hand, the last wave of migration of Jews from Libya, a community that had numbered about 30,000 in the first half of the 20th century, brought approximately 5,000 Jews to Italy. Over the last 2 decades, at least 3 main fields of scholarship have been preoccupied with these subjects, with the processes of acculturation they have underwent, and with the political rather than folkloric identities manifested since their migration to Europe. For example, the arrival of masses of Jews from the Maghreb in France has been tackled from an anthropological and sociological angle as a phenomenon entailing processes of Jewish ethnicization examined by sociologists of religion. This has eventually opened new patterns of investigation to the history of the Jews, on which I will return on a moment. Simultaneously, prominent figures of Francophone writers and intellectuals exploring the complexities of Jewish and Arab belongings, namely Albert Memmi, Jacques Derrida, Hélène Cixous, have been scrutinized by scholars of cultural and feminist studies. From within these same fields of studies, Ella Shohat has theorized the concept of the Arab Jew in 2 articles, Reflection of an Arab Jew and the Invention of the Mizrahim, inaugurating a vigorous stream of critical studies on the Mizrahim identity in Israel and the West. Shoah's conceptualization of the Arab Jews in the 90s was meant to subvert the division created by Zionist and Arab nationalism, claiming from in-between spaces and subjectivities. However, ideas of Arab Jews are much older and variegated. They have circulated as Orientalistic representation since the 19th century and heatedly debated at crucial moments for the defining of French citizenship, for example at the time of the naturalization of the Jews of Algeria with the Crémieux Decree in 1870. Arab Jews' identities have been debated, appropriated, and interpreted by different subjects and contexts for nostalgic, folkloric, or political goals. Recently, historian Emily Benishu-Gottfried, who has grappled with the concept of the Arab Jew addressing Arab-Jewish relation in the Maghreb across different times and places, has emphasized that this is largely an identity of exile. And here comes my second point concerning the shifting narratives of Europe and the West, the renegotiation of identities and spaces at the light of multiple histories, and the shaping of new communities of belonging. Diana Pinto's observation that the Holocaust is no longer a central discourse of European identity is largely shared, but I would like to stress the circulation of other streams of narratives in Europe on the history of the Jews, that stemming from different perception of Western and Jewish belonging, make Europe anything but asemitic. These narratives are centered on the ejection of the Jews from the Muslim countries and their subsequent recovery in Europe. In their most simplistic versions, they represent Europe and the West as driving forces of modernity and civilization that Jews would embrace and Muslims rejected, rejecting many other signs of Westernness, modernity and civilization altogether. Such readings apply a simplified notion of analogous emancipation brought to North Africa and the Middle East in colonial times, overlooking histories of multiple modernities, transcultural contacts, and individual trajectories of Jews and non-Jews across the Mediterranean in the 19th and 20th century. Conflating very different histories of Jewish communities from the Middle East and North Africa into a single tale of Jews of Arab lands, this discourse fosters lachrymose narratives on the history of the Jews as inescapable destiny of exile and persecution. On the other hand, it glosses over multiple shifts and negotiation of the Jews with ideas of whiteness, which would illuminate historical understanding of how ideas of citizenship and belonging have been constructed inside and outside Europe over time. So let me stress at this point that what I am saying is not that the Jews from former European colonies should censor the discrimination, ejection, and traumas they have suffered. On the contrary, I call for the inclusion of these stories in the history of Europe, of these streams of memories in readings of Europe's memory. I believe that the articulation of these narratives sheds light on transformation of ideas of whiteness, Italianness, Arabness, and Jewishness in post-colonial Europe, as I will try to illustrate. So scholars have analyzed the mobilization of narratives of the history of the Jews from North Africa and the Middle East across different media and audiences, for different purpose and by different actors. Yehuda Shenhav, for example, has targeted one of the most radical forms, namely the myth of the Jewish Nakba, or the 1 million Jewish refugees from the Arab countries, fostered as a counter-narrative against the Palestinian Nakba, by groups claiming reparation from Arab countries, such as the World Organization of Jews from the Arab countries, Justice for Jews from Arab countries, and Jews indigenous to the Middle East and North Africa. Through the websites, these groups solicit detailed information about property losses, personal or moral damages resulted from hostile attitude, interdiction, or acts of violence towards Jews in Arab countries, lobbying across national and international institutions. Such activities, among others resulting in configuration into national Sephardi or Mizrahi group, have drawn historians at reflecting upon longer histories of politics of identity and migration. To put it in the words of Frederica Becassis and Jean-François Fau, Jews are far to be the only group of North African or Middle Eastern migrants strategically reconfiguring narratives of identity and belonging, playing with various settings and opportunities. Historian Daniel Schroeder, on the other hand, has illustrated how the conflation of transnational and local identities of the Jews of North Africa into chronological narratives of national communities of Moroccan, Algerian, and Tunisia's Jewries is a byproduct of the colonial history of the Maghreb, anachronistically applied by scholars to the histories and literatures of Jews in these countries. While acknowledging the great contribution to knowledge offered by early studies, this more recent line of scholarship calls for the investigation of the transnational or trans-Mediterranean histories and identities of migration, which blur even the temporal distinction between pre-colonial, colonial, and post-colonial that has characterized much of the scholarly literature on the Maghreb. In this line, also our Mapping Living Memories project has been entitled to the study of the Jews from Libya instead that of the Jews of Libya or of Libyan Jewry. On his turn, Harvey Goldberg, an anthropologist studying the Jews from Tripolitania and Cyrenaica in Israel since the 1960s, has recently targeted the construction of the notion of Libyan Jewry among this community from the diaspora of Libya. He estimates that approximately 90% of the Jews from Libya, notably its most humble elements, migrated between 1949 and 1951 from the old Jewish quarters of Tripoli and Benghazi and from small village to Israel. These people were used to identify themselves with the names of their hometowns or using different language conventions. However, in the multi-ethnic Israeli society of those years, they began to present themselves as Tripolitanians. Broader categories as Sephardim or North African had no meanings for them. So, how the notion of Libyan Jews was developed? According to Goldberg, not from the mention of Blue Libya in the Jerusalem Talmud, since that has no relation with the communities settled in Tripolitania from the 6th century. Moving to the colonial time, it detects two examples of the use of Libyan Jews as a unifying category, both of great impact and addressing outsiders. The first is the book of Mordechai Hakohen, of which Professor Meghnagi has just spoke about. The second stemmed from the participation of a team of Jews from Libya at the Maccabi game in 1935. As for mobilization of the Libyan Jewish identity in Israel, they came with Rabbi Zuarez, an active Zionist and educator who served as a Knesset member until 1969, set up an ethnic organization, the Committee of Libyan Jewish Communities in Israel, and edited the book Yahadut Luv, a reference volume documenting the cultural past of the Jews from Libya. Goldberg's analysis is concerned also with the cultural and political dynamics behind the foundation of the main heritage center of the Jews from Libya, the Or Yehuda Museum in Israel. Piera Rossetto is currently expanding this line of investigation on museum and heritage centers of the Jews from Libya in her doctoral research carried out under the supervision of Emanuela Trevisan and Chantal Bordes Benayoun. So here let me refer to the recent volume on memory and ethnicity in Israel and the diaspora. I will now get back to Italy to point you out the most energetic figure promoting transnational ties among Jews of the diaspora from Libya, Raffaello Fellà, that was born in Tripoli in 1935 and passed away in Rome few years ago. Raffaello Fellà set in Rome in 1967 after sharing with many other fellow Jews and Italians the risk and excitements of an intense and precarious business life in independent Libya. Following the violent turmoil occurred in the country during the Six-Day War, thus provoking the last wave of mass migration of the Jews from Tripoli, Fellà organized in Rome a refugee group of Libyan Jews and a committee for reclaiming refunds against the Libyan government that would take many different forms over the following decades. I believe that Raffaello Fellà is a key figure to understand changes and shifts in the collective narratives of the Jews from Libya and ways in which they intertwine streams of national and transnational narratives on the histories of these Jews. He became member of the World Organization of Jews from the Muslim countries and of many different bodies and associations connecting the Jews from North Africa and the Middle East, scattered across Europe, the US, and Israel under various labels. In turn, he founded the Association of Jews from Libya in Rome in 1960 and the International Commission for Claims of Jews of Libya. He promoted the publication of a foundational text, Ebrei in un paese arabo, the book commissioned to Renzo De Felice, an historian that, as Gudis Schwartz and Michele Sarfatti have shown, has played a crucial role in the history of Italian Jewry and the relation with Italian citizenship. Ebrei in un paese arabo, that was published in 1978, was subsequently translated into English and Hebrew. The vast range of international and transnational activities of Raffaello Fellà, on the other hand, peaked in the 80s, involving a generation of young fellows from Tripoli and Benghazi. This group achieved an eclectic series of political and cultural initiatives, including the establishment of a memorial to the Jews who died in Libya for persecution in the Monumental Cemetery of Rome, the production of a film, of photo exhibitions displayed in Rome, New York, and Tel Aviv, and the organization of two major conventions of the Jews from Libya in New York and Rome. Attempting to mobilize the Jews from Libya and in Israel to join him in this effort, Fellà encouraged and supported the foundation of the Or Yehuda Heritage House that, as Goldberg has pointed out, was inspired by the one established by the Jews from Iraq. Raffaello Fellà and the multiple political, economic, and cultural activities he has promoted transnationally and internationally are calling for further investigation. Fellà and his fellow Jews from Libya have proved having very fluid relation with different communities of memory which intersects the histories and cultures of Italy, Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East in ways that challenge narratives of Europe and its others. As I have anticipated, some of my research questions stem from the interview fieldwork carried out with the Mapping Living Memories project, and I intend proceeding bearing in mind the rather opposite statements of two of our interviewees. The first of them is a former collaborator of Raffaello Fellà, who said, "Noi tripolini non siamo bianchi o neri, ma molto grigi," which translated in English would be, "We the Tripolinians, rather than black or white, we are very, very grey." The second statement, in turn, sounds like a harsh judgment from inside the community. I Tripolini non hanno coscienza politica. Tripolinians, they don't have a political consciousness. I believe that further historical exploration of the trajectories of the Jews from Libya should be carried out, expanding our ideas of political consciousness. In other words, expanding our idea of citizenship in order to explore different forms of belonging articulated by different subjects. Now, in order to proceed towards a conclusion, I will turn to the Mapping Living Memory project, outlining its premises and developments. Can't open the website. Okay. Doesn't matter. I just wanted to show you the page on the CHEDEC website, which you can find online. I can give you the address later. As I have anticipated, the Mapping Living Memories project has been co-designed and carried out with Chiara Rossetto, a graduate student in Hebrew and anthropology for the CHEDEC Foundation of Milan. The project has been funded by the European Source Material Program of the Rothschild Foundation and has benefit of advice and support from a number of academic and research bodies in Europe and Israel. We have collected interviews with 50 men and women who have left Libya between the 1940s and the 1960s, moving to Israel, France, and the UK. These interviews, along with digital copies of personal records, photographs, and other materials donated by interviews, are now deposited at the CHEDEC Foundation. This is the example of a wedding card, of a re-edition of a wedding card of a couple. From a couple that now lives in Israel, in Haifa. Since documentation regarding history of this Jewry is extremely scattered, often uncatalogued and difficult to access, this collection has been aimed first of all towards rescuing fading life stories and neglected sources, notably those of the last generation of Jews born in Libya. This is in line with the chief goal of the CHEDEC Foundation, which has recently launched a new line of research on the social and cultural profile of Italian Jewry, aiming at documenting the contribution of the Jewish Edot, ethnic communities, from North Africa, the Middle East, and Iran to Italian Jewish culture. The Mapping Living Memories project, which has collected and recorded interviews with the Jews from Libya, participates in this overall new line of research on the Edot in Italy, while stretching its investigation towards destination and patterns of migration of the Jews from Libya beyond Italy. We have targeted subjects who consider themselves as Jews, and as previously said, by referring to them as Jews from Libya and not Libyan Jews, we wish to stress the great variety of origins, nationalities, local and transnational identities they bear. The routes and trajectories of our interviews trace a kaleidoscope with new overlappings generated in the context of their arrival, as for example in the case of those Italian-speaking members of the former Benghazi elite, who in Rome found themselves labeled as Tripolini, Jews from Tripoli. A distinctive feature of Mapping Living Memories is that materials have been gathered in multiple destinations of the diaspora of the Jews from Libya. Existing collection of records and interviews, notably in Israel and in Italy, have stemmed from scattered private initiative undertaken by community centers and museums of the Jews of Libya, as they mention Or Yehuda in Israel. They are also increasingly shared via the internet, which would open a different line of investigation, which is not specifically addressed by the project. Most interviews, anyways, contain mentions of websites and fora popular among the Jews from North Africa and the Middle East, or among Italians from Libya. Yet the main goal of our interview fieldwork has been widening the perspective of earlier scholarship, which has relied on diplomatic and institutional archives, particularly those of Jewish and non-Jewish organizations monitoring the mainstreams of migration at critical moments, for example in 1948 and 1967. We have targeted life stories across multiple destinations in Europe and Israel, leaving transoceanic destinations, notably the US and Canada, for further stages of research. By doing so, we have collected narratives originating from community centers, along with trajectories and networks gravitating around alternative hubs, family, social, and non-Jewish. For the same reason, we have avoided relying on tzedek official networks for the interviews fieldwork. We have proceeded instead via a snowball technique, asking to each interview to suggest names and contacts of others which in his or her view would be interested and helpful with the project. In this way, our fieldwork has been largely directed by informal and family networks, more than from networks of religious or communities institutions. We have also excluded the convocation of interviews in the premises of the tzedek Foundation, since that is an important site in the history of the Milanese Jewry and a hub of religious and cultural activities. Instead, our attempt has been that of making of each encounter a unique event, staged by the interviews inside of their choices. Most of the interviews have been recorded in the homes, offices, or other places that interviews are judged relevant for our conversation. So I will skip some other things and go to conclusion because I think we don't have much time. Just showing you some of my favorite probably pictures that I kept that select from all our from those donated by our interviewees, and that came from the families that I'm focusing on, those families that feel their Italian belonging as a very important one. So I mean, as I said, I'm working with these families of Jews from Libya in Italy, and the intersubjective relation at play in our interview fieldwork has resulted for me in a tremendous lesson on the making of history and identities. For example, at some point, I realized that I must give up my early anxieties about researching subjects of a religious minority whose heritage of violence and suffering is incommensurable when compared to my background of white, middle-class, European agnostic woman grown up in comfortable times and location. I have learned that not to monumentalize my interlocutors as Jews because of the traumas embedded in their trajectories is crucial in order to infringe ideas of essential, immutable identities. This creates space for exploring different aspects of their subjectivities and the multiple articulation of being Jews they express. Similarly, this creates space for challenging the lachrymose narratives of Jewish history. Of course, some interviewees might not share this vision, claiming for quintessential Jewish difference and narratives of Jewish destiny in many different ways, and I respect their view. However, it is interesting how Jewishness and Italianness, two of the main categories of self-perception that we have been exploring, have remained largely unarticulated, sites of resistance in the interviewing process. What makes the interviewees Italians but not quite seems to be connected with what makes them Jews. These main categories of self-perception are difficult to explore and express with a non-Jewish interviewer, as I am. I'm starting a conversation between Italian postcolonialism and the memory and narratives of Jews from Libya, believing that the exploration of these memories will open unexpected patterns of representing and imagining Italianness and Jewishness. These men and women from North Africa bear back to Italy, Europe, and Israel multiple ways of being Jew, Arab, Italian, highlighting the historical constructed nature and the ongoing mutual shaping of these very concepts. I do so also in order to explore the limit of the canon of Italian postcolonialism. These subjects are not celebrated heroes of the resistance, nor monumentalized victims of colonialism. Their relation with the ideas of Italianness and whiteness is far more ambiguous. They don't choose to address their complex origins, identity, and language use in the same ways as authors targeted by scholars of Italian postcolonialism, and here I'm referring to writers such as Ija Bashego, Cristina Alifara, Gabriella Germandi, who, according to Sandra Ponzanesi, express consciousness of form of domination and resistance within Italian culture as related to power structures that are connected to both colonial policies and new global dynamics. The Jews from Libya do not articulate that forms of counter-hegemonic stance, yet their trajectories and narratives challenge ideas of homogeneity in Italian culture from obliquous perspectives that stimulate critical awareness. I started with an exploration of memories, believing that memory and subjectivity connect past and present through fantasy and imagination. As Luisa Passerini and Sandro Portelli have pointed out, the intersubjective relation of the interviewing process raises fundamental questions on the meaning and practices of history. These patterns are slippery and difficult to explore, and certainly raise a number of methodological questions. However, for this very reason, they also represent a challenge to our creativity and understanding of disciplines and methodologies. Thank you.